Plans to entice middle-aged retirees back into the workforce to help boost the economy are being considered by the government. It comes after the number of 50 to 64-year-olds who are neither working nor job hunting has shot up by 375,000 since the pandemic.
But would they be welcomed back by younger generations? And will their years of life experience be valued? Joining us now is veteran broadcaster John Humphrys, who says there's a lack of respect for today's elders, and author and podcaster Olivia Petter, who thinks young people just have more progressive views. Good morning to both of you. John, let's come to you first, because I know that you've written about this, haven't you, feeling that there's a certain lack of respect from the younger generation when it comes to their elders.
Yes. I suppose I did put it quite like that. Yes, there is a lack of respect. I mean, that rather suggests that I expect them to call me sir and bow when I walk into the room, which would be very nice. I mean, of course, if they did that, I wouldn't complain. But it's fairly unlikely, and I don't really want that. No, I just want to be treated like anybody else. It shouldn't matter whether you're 20 or 40 or 60 or 80, you should be treated with a degree of respect by your fellow human beings. You should not be categorised. You shouldn't be put into another category. They say, oh, he's old, you know, what the hell. Yeah, let's not bother listening to him more. He's bound to say that, isn't he? Because he's old. That's the thing that gets to me.
Well, I hear that, John, but when have you experienced that? You know, lots of people complain about it, but what's your sort of concrete example of it?
Well, I've never personally, because of the sort of job I do, I have never been personally abused in that sense. But what you do get, and what I do notice now particularly, when somebody is being interviewed, whether another person, a younger person, is being interviewed. A good example, if you like, the other day, and it happened to be on the BBC, but it's all over the place. Somebody was being interviewed about the cost of living, and the interviewer said, one of the ways to save your cost, or so an old person, he didn't put it quite like that, obviously, but so an old person said the other day when they were young, what they used to do was switch off the heat in rooms that they were not using, as though that was, in some way, truly bizarre. And because it was an old person saying it, it was worthy of contempt. And of course, it's entirely sensible. Of course, you switch off the heat in the room that you're not using. I've got plenty of money. I'm not short of cash. But I switch off the heat in rooms that I am not using. Don't you? I mean, why would you not? Aren't we meant to be short of energy?
It's a good point.
But
Olivia,
it's an old person who used to do it.
Let's pick up with you on that one. I mean, you know, John is saying there he wants to be treated like any other person. There's this feeling that, you know, our elders are not necessarily being given the same respect that they should be.
I think, I mean, the idea of, like, respect your elders, sort of against all odds, is quite an archaic idea in and of itself. I think the issue with that is that
Which I did not say, of course.
No, you didn't.
I think it's quite one way. I think what we need to do is actually call for more compassion between the generations, because I think we're kind of in this world where we really pit generations against each other. You know, there are all these stereotypes about boomers and millennials and Gen Z, and it's all this kind of culture of competitiveness and superiority where everyone thinks that they know more than the other. And what happens is that we lack these really important conversations with compassion that would help drive progression and change. And I think a lot of it is actually probably about ego that prevents people from having these, like, healthy conversations about how the world has changed and how we can adapt.
But isn't it the case when it comes to younger people, you call for compassion and you see it on the Twitter bios, I believe in compassion, and actually what that means is listen to me, because I know more as a younger person. And it's a disingenuous thing. There is a lack of respect for a generation like Johnson. To be clear, John, you didn't say that, but I'm going to say it for you, and I hope you don't mind. I suspect you'd say it better than me. You were born, I think, in 1940...
Feel free, you say it.
In 1943, right? And your parents...
I was. I shall look... I am going to be 80 this year. Well, next year, but... I mean,
right.
Yeah.
And it's important
I hate the word compassion. I don't want people to treat me with compassion, by the way.
Right.
Absolutely not. Sorry, Olivia, nothing personal, but I do not seek or want compassion. I just want to be treated like anybody else.
Well, like anybody else, but also an element of respect. The idea that you don't grow and pick up wisdom and that younger generation can, with respect, learn from that. One of the things that I've experienced in the last week, for instance, is listening to young people, brilliant though they are at a number of things, and I can learn a huge amount from them, and that's it's not compassion, it makes common sense to listen and hear. But my question is,
Absolutely.
that generation, the ones that fought for, well, John's parents, our grandparents and great-grandparents fought for our freedom, for instance. There's a generation that I listen to and hear that have no understanding, no respect, no, frankly, grounding in that history. And I wonder whether if some of that intergenerational conflict is partly because not just the boomers that you might describe that were the economic beneficiaries that own their houses and so on and so forth, but a lack of understanding of the fight that was required for the freedoms that the younger generations enjoy, but have no respect or no real understanding or knowledge of what sacrifice it took for them to be the beneficiaries of it.
Well, I don't think that's entirely true, and I think that's tapping into another stereotype of young people, isn't it? That we're sort of millennial snowflakes, that we aren't tough and we don't want to work hard and we just spend all our time buying avocados and scrolling through Instagram, which is another stereotype that I think is really unhelpful. But I think the important thing to point out here is that young people have grown up in a very different world to how people John's age grew up. When boomers were growing up, women couldn't get abortions. Their primary role was in the home. It was a very different environment to what we have now. And I think there has to be an acceptance that, obviously, of some things, yes, people my age are going to have so much more respect for elderly people and to listen to their views about, all sorts of things. But there has to be a mutual understanding that in some cases, when it comes to the understandings of the modern world and societal progressions, young people might actually have something to teach them as well. And I think there has to be this mutual conversation there.
Hang on.
John, what do you make of that?
Well, I think, with great respect, that's completely rubbish. I mean, it was people of my generation who changed the world. Yes, Olivia's absolutely right. There was a time when I was a young man when it was virtually impossible for a woman to get an abortion. There was a time when it was a criminal offence for one man to sleep with another man. We, Olivia, my generation, changed all that. This is a much more tolerant, inclusive world than it was. And yes, I have massive respect for my parents, of course, but in today's terms, by today's standards, they were probably racist because they never met anyone. We were desperately poor. We lived in a white slum. They never met any black people in those days. It was long before Windrush and all the rest of it. But they changed things, and they changed them massively. And look, I've got children and grandchildren who range in age from 16 to, heaven forbid, 55. So there's an awful lot of them, and they are all different. Some of them believe in some things, some believe in other things. And I want to say equally, because of course the 16-year-old doesn't know as much about the world as my 55-year-old son. She is a bit less mature. Well, of course she's less mature. She's 16, but she's growing up very, very fast indeed. She's highly intelligent and she's picking up an awful lot of stuff, which is the way it works. But to go back to the word that we used at the beginning, which I didn't terribly much care for, Rob used, was the word respect. I respect her, but I expect her to learn. Look, I am still learning. I am nearly 80, and I am still learning. And I want that not to be respected, but to be acknowledged. I do not want to be put into a different category, and I absolutely, positively do not want compassion. What for? What for? What have I done to deserve compassion? I'm as fit as anybody I know. I've just come in now from having my early morning run. I'm up at 6 every morning having a run and so on and so on. So I'm as fit as a fiddle. I have no need, thank you very much, for compassion. I'm still working as hard as I've ever worked. I've run a charity, which I've done for a long time, called the Kitchen Table Charities Trust, which helps very poor kids in Southern Africa. Got the plug in. And I'm as active as I have ever. I want nobody's compassion.
John, you're no stranger to the interruption, so I just want to say thank you very much. We have to give the last word to Olivia out of respect and not out of compassion.
Olivia?
Well, I think, look, with all due respect, young people are changing the world. All you have to do is look at the news and, you know, look at the Me Too movement. And yes, of course, people of John's generation have created huge changes and contributed to the progressive society that we are in now. But young people deserve their respect just as much as they deserve ours.
What would you like to thank the older generation for being not compassionate, but it's your language, not mine? What would you like to thank the older generation for, your grandparents and great-grandparents, being in a, let's say, an age-blended work environment? What would your... how would you express that gratitude?
How would I express that gratitude, Christ? I mean, I think the most important thing for me as a young woman is seeing the equality between the sexes and having women in the workplace and not just, you know, bound to the home. I think that's a pretty important progression that I would thank my grandparents for.
Very good. And on the subject of sort of bringing everyone together, John, what would you like to say to thank the younger generation for in that case?
For being there and for being as provocative and interesting and intelligent and thoughtful and, yes, compassionate as they are. I was about to say I love young people. It would be such a stupid thing to say, wouldn't it? Of course, I think young people are wonderful. Obviously they are.
Yeah. There we are.
Some of them horrible as well. But,
I just like the idea
Goes for all
that
generations,
we were reading
doesn't it?
out, it says 60 is middle age. So, you know, I've got a few years. I'm going to live to 120.
There we go.
Excellent.
John
you've got
and,
a long way to
also
go, Rob, a long way to go.
Olivia, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.